morning, everybody, and welcome to our webinar this morning or this afternoon on SharePoint 2016, Built from the Cloud Up. So my name is Carl Sawatsky on behalf of CTC Train Canada. I'd like to welcome you all to this very exciting event as we kick off our fall series of webinars. So I know a lot of you have been eagerly anticipating this, very interested in what SharePoint 2016 has to offer and about the cloud integration and how the cloud has really influenced its development. So today we're happy to have with us Jared Thibodeau. Jared has been an instructor with us for 20+ years, and in addition to a lot of classroom experience teaching these products, Jared also has a lot of hands-on experience as well as in his own consulting work, implementing these solutions to a broad range of private public sector customers. So if you have questions on how this actually works in the real world, Jared is well positioned to answer those questions for you. So just a couple of housekeeping items. Hopefully you can all hear me well and fine. If not, feel free to post comments in the chat function of the webinar. Likewise, if you do have a question for Jared, feel free to post that in the chat section. And depending on how things are flowing, we may address that to you right away or sum up all of the questions at the end. So again, thank you very much for joining us. And without further ado, I'll pass the word over to Jared. And Jared will take us now on this SharePoint journey. Thank you, Jared.
Yeah, thanks, Carl, for the introduction there. And, you know, just to quickly recap here what Carl was mentioning, due to the fact that we do have quite a large participant base today, we're going to try and hold our questions off until the end if we can to you know, just to ensure that we have the opportunity to get through the content. And then, of course, at the end of the content, we will, you know, we'll take a few minutes there to address anybody's questions that they might have. And, of course, you know, any additional content or any questions that you guys may have pertaining to maybe, you know, the administrative aspect of SharePoint 2016, feel free to bring those topics up. You know, and we'll take some time at the end to review that. So hopefully everybody can hear me coming through nice and clearly. Again, don't hesitate to let us know if for any reason, you know, you can't hear me coming through nice and clear. And of course, you should see right now up on the main slides, SharePoint 2016's presentation. And I'll be going through some demonstrations with everybody to ensure, you know, that we're kind of referring back to the product as we go through the topics this morning or this afternoon, I should say, you know, to give you guys an idea of what to expect with the newer product. Now, one of the good things I will say in reference to SharePoint, you know, is that often we see that, you know, moving from one product to the next, Microsoft has a tendency of changing a lot of the look and feel, a lot of the different design aspects. But luckily in this version of 2016, there has been, you know, not a substantial change to the look and feel from what we saw back in 2013. So, you know, those of you who are, you know, or have become more familiar with the 2013 product, this will give you guys, you know, kind of a solid platform to work with and something that is, you know, familiar to what you're already using. So luckily, we're not seeing a huge shift in the overall look and feel, but definitely some good additions to the 2016 product. And again, as Carl was mentioning previously, it is built from the cloud up. So, you know, really the intention here is to provide a similar architecture, a similar, you know, platform to what we're using already in products like Office 365 and our SharePoint Online technologies. We're going to see a lot of that, you know, kind of consistent, you know, application management and a lot of this, you know, cloud architecture kind of carried forward into the 2016 product. So, you know, with that said, let's get started here, ladies and gents, and we'll talk a little bit about, you know, some of the new additions, some of the changes to the product that we're seeing. You know, and again, you know, luckily here, we're not seeing a substantial shift in the look and feel. And I'm just going to bring up, you know, my SharePoint server here so we can have a quick look. Okay, so I'm seeing here that Noor, you're not able to hear at the moment. So again, my audio should be coming through nice and clearly. Please let me know, Carl, again, if you can't hear me, but it looks like my audio is coming through kind of clearly here. So Noor, I would maybe check your speaker levels on your side. You know, you might have to turn us up on your end a little bit there. But please let me know anybody that can't hear me coming through clearly, and I'll try to adjust accordingly. So, you know, with that said, just coming back to you know, the look and feel and the user aspect or the user interface aspect of what we're seeing here, you can tell right away that those of you working on a 2013 technology, you know, we'll see the, you know, the consistent kind of Metro interface that we're used to from the 2013 product. Again, that kind of blue tiled look and feel that we saw back originally introduced in the 2013 product. You can see that's carried over consistently back into the 2016. So again, you know, our tiled kind of look and feel, our standard quick launch menu is still there. Our top link bar hasn't changed substantially from what it was back in 2013. But what you're going to see here is, of course, a shift on the, you know, the top kind of navigational tools that we see here. And of course, now the addition of the, what we call the app launcher. So, you know, if you're familiar with the OneDrive Online, or you're using any of the OneDrive technologies currently with SharePoint Online or your Office 365 technology, then you're going to know that this is a pretty consistent tool that Microsoft has carried forward from Office 365, and it's that, you know, our app launcher mechanism. So it's going to, you know, host a lot of our different tool sets in here, everything from our site management to, you know, news feed information, our OneDrive for business. And of course, as we start to add any new technologies, such as our Office web apps, you know, if we're using, you know, any of our Word Online, any of our Excel Online, then we're going to see those applications available to us here within the app launcher tool. So a lot of, you know, fast launch ability here. It's really kind of keeping it clean, giving us the ability to launch into any one of our tool sets from here. So again, you know, that kind of consistent look and feel to what we're used to in Office 365. And, you know, if we look at the top here, we've got, of course, our SharePoint app launcher. We've got our site structure here, which is going to show us anything that we're following. So again, that collaborative kind of mechanism is carried forward. And, you know, they haven't changed a lot here as to, you know, the location of our site settings and a lot of our site management tools. So again, we can see our little cog up here at the top right corner, which of course is going to show us all of our permission sets, you know, our ability to add and libraries and different applications, and of course, you know, site settings and site contents, which, you know, again, pretty consistent with what we had back in 2013, just a little bit of a change to look and feel, you know, slightly here, but again, keeping that consistent UI is really, you know, a benefit for those who, you know, who are familiar with migrating from, let's say, 2010 to 2013. There was such a substantial change in the look and feel that it really did kind of affect, you know, the learning curve of the technology, kind of getting used to where everything was located and trying to find all that stuff. The nice thing here is that, you know, they've kind of carried over that that consistent UI from what we had in 2013. So, you know, not a huge shift there. Of course, we, you know, our My Site information will be available to us underneath our user account object up here in the top right. So again, our About Me information, which will immediately kind of link us back into our My Sites, you know, and give us a, you know, an ability here to start looking at what, you know, content we're following, you know, from documents to people to sites and so on and so forth, which we'll tackle in a minute here, and I'll visit that topic with you guys in a short minute here. So not a huge shift, really just kind of carrying that Office 365 over from, you know, what we see in the online technology. Now, you know, a lot of the nice shifts here that we see are new user interface, you know, additions like the drag and drop top link bar, which, you know, we've had the drag and drop ability on the quick launch in previous versions, but we've never really had that ability to quickly edit our top link bar up here, which, you know, really is dedicated to the site architecture of SharePoint. So, you know, a nice addition here to be able to quickly come in, you know, drag and drop links of sites that, you know, we find relevant, document locations. Again, this is really going to be reserved more specifically for site architecture and site links that we have within SharePoint. So, you know, giving us that ability to quickly edit this is going to, you know, add some ease of navigation for a lot of the user base, you know, and make it simple to quickly go in and edit our top link bars to add navigational components for SharePoint, you know, easing a little bit of that navigational complexity that, you know, we often see within SharePoint. So, nice addition here in our ability to add sites. Again, the structure is pretty consistent. So as we start to build, you know, the site design and our site architecture, what we're really going to see here is, of course, an improved time, you know, an improved speed of which it takes us to create the sites. You know, those of you familiar with 2013, maybe even 2010 will remember that, you know, creating sites was not often a very, you know, snappy process, and oftentimes it, it could take anywhere between a minute to 2 minutes before we actually saw that site in operation. So, I'll revisit this topic in a few minutes here, and we'll come back to actually creating the site, but definitely some improvements in the amount of time it takes, but, some nice additions to the overall kind of editing of our pages and our navigational links within SharePoint. So, definitely improvement there from Microsoft's side. Now, definitely some improvements to our image, previews, our video, and really what we refer to as our site assets within SharePoint. And our ability now to, of course, get a nice preview of that content, providing us with an overview and some content information as to, first and foremost, where it's located, who it's shared with, and of course, when it was last modified. And of course, we see here the ellipsis, which gives us what we call the call-out menu, which gives us a little more functionality into, who it's being shared with, if we need to share it out with anybody additional to who it's, already shared currently with. And if we're looking at video previews, it also gives us a little video preview of that, that asset within SharePoint, and we can actually, have a quick presentation of that video directly within the call-out menu. So, nice addition there. I mean, not a huge shift from what we saw in 2013, but definitely an improvement to the speed at which we see access to these assets within SharePoint. So, improved asset management, better video and image previewing, and much faster response within SharePoint. So we're not often sitting there kind of, waiting for SharePoint to kind of respond for us, or, what we usually saw in previous versions was that kind of latency, that lag in the time it took to present the information. So definitely a big improvement there into the, the preview of our content and the, the ability to see that content quickly within our SharePoint lists and libraries. Now, one of the big things that we're seeing here is, of course, our now ability to synchronize, document libraries with our local system. So, what we're going to see here up on our ribbon, and of course, directly within the library links, is our ability now to synchronize this content. So we can come in and we can, choose to sync this library with a specific device, be it a Surface tablet, be it our desktops or laptops, or even a mobile platform now. So what's, the big improvement here is the speed at which we can synchronize the content within SharePoint to our local systems. And of course, an improvement to, how we see the synchronization taking place. So, I definitely will say that the improvement on the SharePoint OneDrive is substantial. It's much faster. Users are seeing a big improvement to the speed at which we can synchronize content locally, and also between SharePoint, in different sites and document libraries, or let's say, specifically content libraries. So, definite improvement there, but a great thing is that if we look at, the overall look and feel of the SharePoint environment, we can see that, little has changed in the sense of our ribbon navigational tools. A lot of our existing utilities that were available to us back in 2013 have carried over. So all of our ability to, establish workflows, to share content, to follow that content as well has not changed. A lot of our library settings have not changed either. So, the consistency here is carried over, and that's a great feature set, and I guess, in my eyes, a great move on Microsoft's part, to kind of limit the amount of, the size of our learning curve here, to kind of get back into the, the kind of, the way of how we do things in SharePoint. There's not as much time spent kind of learning where everything is and trying to find out where all that, Microsoft has hidden all these settings. A lot of this is carried over from what we had in 2013. So, your user base is not going to be spending as much time trying to, educate and learn where all of this is. Lots of this stuff carries back over from 2013. So the consistent navigational tools will be there for your users to really help to quickly adopt the product and get this out and working again within the environment. So, I must give it to Microsoft. A lot of our time, as instructors, as implementers, is re-educating our environment to the changes that we see within SharePoint from each version to the next. And this time around, that's really been diminished with this technology. So they've really, kept it consistent, kept it, coherent with what they've had in previous versions. So that learning curve is really diminished substantially. So great move there on Microsoft's part, and the ability to, of course, have that synchronization ability, and your users can follow, can have content local to their systems, and make it available offline for editing and so on and so forth is really going to help to to get users into SharePoint and using it fast and easily. So great move on Microsoft's part there. One of the other improvements here that we're seeing is Microsoft's move to kind of add a larger file size limit. Previous versions were usually limited by anywhere between 250 megs as a default, right up to 2 gigs. So there was often times that users were uploading files that were larger than 2 gigs and were kind of stuck in a kind of a limbo where they were working on it for hours at a time, and all of a sudden the SharePoint would go into kind of a limbo state and just kind of sit there. Whereas now they've kind of improved that size and upped the size to about 10 gigs, they say, as kind of a maximum. Now, in reality, there's no limit. And now this does have to be configured, so administrators do have to go in and actually configure your file size limit on the web application itself. But the great thing here is that there's really no limitation to the size of content that we put in SharePoint. So, but rule of thumb here, guys and gals, is to really try and keep it underneath 10 gigs. And I have seen that in my experience with the new technology here in 2016 is that even though they say there's no real limit and that administrators can define and kind of say, it's unlimited as to the size, 10 gigs seems to be kind of the default size here that Microsoft is going to, permit, let's say logically. Let's say, in any environment, you really don't want to be exceeding the 10 gig size because it's ultimately going to impact the server's performance and ultimately the performance of what the users see on their end. So the rendering of the page and so on and so forth. So even though Microsoft kind of says there's no real limit, let's kind of go with the number of 10 gigs because that really is kind of the maximum size that SharePoint will allow, functionally. So this is a great feature set. Our ability now, especially if you're dealing with environments that are, really dependent on large size assets, so large videos, a lot of content uploading, and a lot of large size files. This is going to really kind of improve the performance and improve the kind of the experience that your users are seeing on their end, and the ability to upload a lot of these large file sizes, these large assets, videos, and image files that maybe beyond the old default of 2 gigs. So great improvement there. Larger file support and our ability to kind of go a bit beyond what Microsoft has offered in the past. Now, of course, huge emphasis on the collaboration experience and, of course, the mobile experience. Now, dependent on the environment that you're in, if you're coming in from a government agency, a lot of us are still dealing with BlackBerry enterprise services. So better rendering for different device channels, and of course, huge improvements to different mobile device platforms. So everything from Android to iOS, right down to Bez, BlackBerry, Windows Phone, of course, is going to be pretty consistent with the Microsoft architectures, and especially SharePoint. So really good rendering inside a Windows device, more specifically Surface devices. We're looking at Windows 8, Windows 10 phones, which, as good as they are, I'm not seeing a huge amount of use in a lot of enterprises at the moment of Windows phones. But again, now better rendering for products like, Android and iOS, where the rendering of that content will be much cleaner on the devices themselves, and definite improvement to, the type of content rendering that we see on these different device channels. So, I will definitely say that there's a huge mobile device improvement here. As we see this kind of moving forward, Microsoft is always going to do a lot better at supporting, of course, their own devices. But, we're seeing, even from 2013 forward, we've seen a lot of improvement to the different device channel support that Microsoft has provided. So even back in 2013, we also saw the improvement of rendering of this, SharePoint content on both Android and iOS. So, if your environment is dealing with a lot of Android devices or more of a BYOD, you're going to see that there's a much better collaboration experience on those devices than there was previously. So our ability now to render that content properly, to provide a nice and touch-friendly kind of mobile interface to the user base is really going to see an improvement to our mobile platforms and their ability to, of course, access the SharePoint content that they require. So, a definite improvement there. I'm not going to say it's substantial from what we saw in 2013, but there's definitely been some improvements to the rendering on devices like Surface and Android. iOS is pretty much the same as what we saw in 2013, but there's definitely been some improvements to the Surface devices and, of course, our Android devices as well. Now, as we look forward, one of the big, kind of products that we're still kind of sitting on the fence on, at least that I've seen, is, of course, Microsoft's Office Graph as well as the Delve technology. Now, what this is more of a collaborative tool set that Microsoft has kind of brought forward, that really allows us to see this kind of relationship that we have to, everything from content to other users, to other applications that we use within SharePoint. So a lot of this is kind of dependent on this aggregated information that is propagated not only from SharePoint, but also from products like LinkedIn, Yammer, Facebook, if we're opening it up to that kind of extent, and really provide a more kind of consistent social architecture and kind of more informative environment with this Office Graph technology. And so what this is really showing kind of an activity stream about information that I'm following, sites that are pertinent to me, applications that I'm using more consistently, and we can really kind of see the information that is more relevant to us as users, as kind of members of our SharePoint environment, and not only that, but of other applications like Yammer. Now, Yammer seems to be a big draw within a lot of U.S. platforms that we've seen and that I've seen in the past, but I don't see a huge amount of use of Yammer here in Canada yet. Which not necessarily surprising, but still quite in its infancy. And as we start to see the product of SharePoint growing, we're starting to see a little more kind of use and consumption of technologies like Yammer, and integrations of technologies like Facebook, Yammer, LinkedIn, and you're really seeing that kind of collaborative architecture, that that folksonomic design. And that's really what this is this this kind of structured folksonomy of socially, collaborative information that I'm following. And really it allows me to kind of keep abreast of information that is pertinent to me. So, this is something that we're going to see a lot more emphasis on. Now, take it with a grain of salt. I mean, right now I'm seeing a lot of mixed reviews on both Office Graph and the Delve technology, because there's, really kind of been some argument here as to the pertinence or the relevance of this kind of integration and whether or not it's really providing us with the, the information that we want. So there's still a lot of people that are on the fence about the use of both Office Graph and Delve, but when you start to use an Office 365 product and you start to see this tight integration of, what it is that I'm following, the information that's relevant to me, and what I'm tagging, what I'm adding notes to, and really building that folksonomic architecture, that kind of, social collaborative emphasis. This is really where Delve will really shine. And, from my aspect, it really helps for users to quickly adopt the technology, to locate the information that's relevant to them, and not only that, but have it presented to them in a fashion that's similar to, social technologies that we have and that we're used to using on a day-to-day basis. So if we look at our Facebook architectures and our news feeds, our activity feeds, it's very similar to that look and feel. And if you're doing things like Pinterest or you're using things like Stumble, Pinterest and StumbleUpon are very similar into the presentation of information. Whereas it's presented with an image, it provides us with some relevant information as to, who's commenting, who's adding notes and tags, how many people are following it. And then, of course, it allows us to quickly link to that information and add our own tags, add our own notes to it, and really build that folksonomic design. So, I think that they've definitely, added a technology here that can be extremely useful for a lot of users that are, becoming more familiar with these social architectures and these collaborative architectures. So I will say that the integration of things like Outlook, your calendar, your OneDrive, and then of course products like Yammer and Delve, all into this one streamlined kind of centralized interface, really provides users with kind of a stepping stone and a kind of consistent platform and kind of a kickoff point that they can access all their information. And I think that, from a social environment and a social collaborative aspect, they've definitely improved this to a point that it's going to become much more useful to the user base and much more relevant to what they do on a day-to-day basis. So, will we see this, right away? Maybe not, and maybe this isn't something that we're going to be using right out, as we start to implement the new 2016 technology. But, over time, as we start to integrate technologies like Yammer, Delve, and Office Graph, this may become a much more utilized product and aspect of SharePoint that really does give your users a kind of consistent and more common platform to, look at what they're following, follow the information that's relevant to them, and really provide this, one kind of kickoff point for everything that they do. So huge improvement there with the Delve and the Office Graph. Whether we see this right away or whether it becomes kind of a major facet of our SharePoint environment is to be seen, but I think that there's definitely a push in this direction and a more, folksonomic design to what Microsoft is offering in their kind of SharePoint 2016 and Office 365 environments. So great improvement there. Hopefully we see, this kind of becoming a big piece of SharePoint 2016, but it's a lot of people are still kind of on the fence on the performance of Delve and Office Graph and what really it's going to provide back to the environment. So, also another big piece that we see here, is that a lot of this is going to be available to us from our Office, or what we call the Office 365 app launcher. So again, we can see the Delve here, which will ultimately take us into this piece here, which gives us that, that really nice kind of look and feel to a lot of the content that we use within SharePoint. So nice addition there. And, whether we see it right away is something to be seen, but hopefully it becomes a major piece because I think it's definitely a great facet for users who are, familiar with the, the social tools that we're using today in a web environment. Now, site folders, when we start to look at the overall use of our OneDrives, I mean, really not a huge change, but, definite improvements here. When we start to look at everything from the news feed to the content that we're following within SharePoint, to everything from our personal information that's, we store within SharePoint, there have definitely been some improvements here. When we look at, of course, our My Site, standard stuff applies. We've got our profile information, which we can quickly jump into and add information that's, pertinent to who we are and what we do and, kind of our areas of expertise. But in our news feed as well, we're going to see everything from our blogs to, different applications that we use within SharePoint. So everything from, social apps like our blogs to, site document lists and libraries. And one of the big ones here is, of course, jumping down into the OneDrive for Business. We're going to see everything from, the documents that we're following to content that we're sharing with other users within SharePoint to, recent information that we've been looking at, which really does give your users a nice kind of recent kickoff point so they can quickly go back to content that they've been, using on a regular basis within SharePoint. To also the use of what we call site folders. And, this was one of the problems that we found back in 2013. Users get lost. And, if you use SharePoint, you know what I'm talking about. I mean, it's one of these things where you can drill down into your My Site and then all of a sudden, you're lost. You can't seem to find your way back up to the, the site you were using. And, it's a pretty consistent problem that we've encountered in SharePoint is that ability to get lost very quickly and kind of not be able to find your way back to, one of the top level sites or one of the sites that you're using. And unless we were following these sites, in SharePoint 2013, we really didn't get a consistent list or location that we could go to find this information. Whereas now, a lot of what we do is going to be drilled down into our OneDrive, and it's going to provide us with these site folders where whatever we have access to, these site folders are going to be listed here, and it's going to give me kind of a consistent kickoff point where I can come to my My Site in my OneDrive and then, have a quick overview of what sites that I've got available to me and then quickly kick off into those points. And if I want to drill down directly into, let's say, a document library, it's going to show me those those subfolders and those sub-libraries that are available in each one of these sites. So what I think they've really done here to improve it is the ability to not only navigate out to each one of these sites, but also to, sub-directories and sub-libraries that are available in each one of these sites. You know, and in the past, a lot of this came back to, you know, the administrators, your site collection administrators, you know, properly modifying the navigational hierarchy so that we could see all of the structure. Well, now within 2016, we can manage this stuff on our own, and we can really, you know, be able to, you know, quickly navigate to locations in SharePoint that previously were not as easy to find. You know, so now, you know, drilling down into a document library is much faster for a user than it was in the past, where I was trying to find the site, going to the site, and then drilling down into these document libraries manually. What we're now able to do is directly from OneDrive, using these site folders, is link very quickly into each subsequent, you know, site, and then from there be able to drill down into each one of these libraries and access them very quickly. So definite improvement here to the navigational features that we saw, you know, in previous versions, and giving your users a more kind of consistent, you know, kind of kickoff point in their OneDrives and in their My Sites, to be able to quickly access content that's relevant to them and that's, you know, that's important for them to find quickly. So nice improvement there. Of course, you know, as we saw within, you know, SharePoint 2013 was the ability now to kind of change the look and feel of our, you know, our documents, you know, our site kind of look and feel. And if we drill down to, let's say, a site here, we have our full screen menus. So let's, you know, just quickly drilling down into our document library, we can now kind of get rid of a lot of our navigational features using this full screen tool, which kind of opens up a lot of nice feature sets here to kind of improve the kind of real estate that's available to us when we're using SharePoint. So, you know, our follow button has carried forward, our share button has carried forward from 2013, as well as the full screen. So not a huge change there, but, you know, giving our users the ability to quickly follow your document libraries, site content, as well as being able to quickly share some of that content with other users within SharePoint, you know, gives that more collaborative experience to the user base. And I think that, you know, some of the concerns for us back in 2013 was just how much control users had with being able to share these, you know, these sites, being able to kind of inadvertently provide access to users that they may not want to be providing access to. What's nice now is in 2016, it gives us a better kind of sharing utility here, that we can really quickly see who this content is shared with, look at the advanced permissions, you know, and be able to, as you know, as opposed to before, you know, kind of not really having a clear, you know, identification as to what's being shared and who it's being shared with. In 2016, we have a much nicer tool to see who it's being shared with, and our ability then, you know, to invite other users, you know, who we may find relevant to add to, let me just change this here, you know, to the SharePoint sites and site, you know, document libraries. We can quickly add a personal message, come in here, and then say, you know, we want to add this user, let's say, to our, you know, editing group, our members group, send an email invitation, and then add a personal message. Now, this was available to us back in 2013, but they've definitely changed a little bit of the look and feel here. And of course, giving us the same granularity that we had to be able to share it and specify the permissions. So really pushing that, you know, collaborative experience, that ability for users to share content quickly and provide access to resources within SharePoint easily and consistently. So nice feature set there, you know, not something that's new to 2016. This is something that we did have available to us back in 2013, but just really improving that navigational experience for your user base, okay? Now, you know, one of the big changes that you guys are, you know, can really look forward to in 2016 is what we call the new Compliance Center. And I'm a big fan of this. You know, we had some little pieces of this back in 2013, but we really didn't see a full and kind of true compliance management architecture. And a lot of the problem came back to OneDrive, you know, and our ability to kind of decide and maintain content for a, you know, specific duration. And unfortunately, you know, OneDrive can get out of hand. You know, your users are using it to store personal content, from pictures to videos to, you know, whatever it is that they find, you know, pertinent to them. And unfortunately, this can get out of hand very quickly. It can bloat, it can balloon, and it can get to a point that it becomes unmanageable, right? And a lot of the concern from an administrative standpoint in 2013 was, you know, how do we manage the content that's being stored in these OneDrives, you know, and how long do we retain it for? And, you know, there was never really a a clean policy definition in 2013 for content that was stored in OneDrive. Well, they've really shifted that in 2016, and we now have this, what we call the Compliance Center. And what's great about the Compliance Center that I find is not only for those of us dealing with ATIP, if you're a government agency and you're dealing with access to information and privacy acts, you know how difficult it can sometimes be to kind of retrieve information or to determine, kind of retention policies against different areas of SharePoint. Not only that, but what we didn't really see a lot of emphasis on in 2013 was what we call data loss prevention and our ability to manage DLP-based policies, or what we call data loss prevention policies. Well, what they've done in 2016 is they've added our own area now to manage what we call DLP policies to help maintain the sensitive content that we have within the organization. And not only that, but they've also added these deletion policies for things like My Sites and OneDrive for Business. So this is a great feature set here, and our deletion policies allow us to come in and very quickly define a policy that pertains to, be it OneDrive, be it different areas of SharePoint, let's say a document library or a picture library, wherever it is that we find relevant to apply these deletion policies. We can quickly come in and define a policy, let's say, and then apply a new policy rule. And what's great about these policies is that we have the ability to not only add one retention policy, but numerous retention policies for one deletion policy. Now, what happened in the past is that you were really limited to applying these policies directly at either the list, library level, or at the content type level. But what this now permits us in 2016 is to create a deletion policy and add numerous rules to that policy and then apply all of those rules to different areas of SharePoint. So what I'm able to do here is come in, create a different rule for this policy. And let's say, for example, this is a, let's say a 2-year, default statute of limitations here. I would come in and say, here's my 2-year policy, which is going to delete to the recycle bin, which is going to give me a 60-day kind of, period after it's deleted. And I'm going to say that, from the time that that document was last modified plus 2 years, I'm then going to go ahead and delete that document and move it to the recycle bin. And then what I may want to do is add another deletion policy that says that, after another 5-year period to meet my 7-year, let's say, statute of limitations, I can then come in and choose to permanently delete that object, if it was, from the date of creation or from the date of last modified, plus my 5 years, and then add that to my other rules as well. So what this now allows me to do is add multiple rules to one specific deletion policy. And then I can apply that deletion policy to different areas of SharePoint where I want to retain content for that specific period of time. So this is a great feature set and really allowing us a little more broad scope in how we manage the content that's stored within SharePoint. And in previous versions, the unfortunate thing was that we were really limited as to scope and as to the amount of rules that could be added. Now in SharePoint 2016, we're getting a lot more broad in our scope and our ability to add numerous rules to one specified policy. So, I really think that this is a great improvement. Not only that, but, policy assignments, we can now come in and add different policy assignments for different templates within SharePoint. So we can come in here, add a template that we specifically want to define. So this could again be, associated to all team sites. It could be associated to, different project sites, developer blogs. And then of course we can begin to apply this to things like e-discovery, our in-place hold policy centers, or even into things like search, BI, and even records retention centers. So as I come in here, I can add it to a site collection template, or I can take it up a bit higher and then now put it right to the OneDrive for Business and actually say that this now applies directly to all the OneDrives that are associated to my users within SharePoint. And then that allows me to come in, specify the policy that I want to bring forward. I've just created that default retention policy here, so I'm going to add that one in. And now I've got, a template assigned to all of my OneDrives that's then going to use these specific rules and mark this policy as mandatory, save it, and now I know that I've got a nice template, basically a policy that's assigned to all of my OneDrives that can then manage all of the content that's stored within the OneDrives for each user's My Site. So this is a huge improvement to what we had previously, in SharePoint 2016, and the granularity is really there. I've gone and assigned this right to the OneDrive. As I showed you guys, we can really come in here and we can define, as we start to create different sites, we can assign this directly to the templates that we have, or we can take it down and be really specific and then start to define this directly to the site collections themselves. So I can say that this applies to my entire team site. I would come in here and basically define the site collection that this applies to, give the URL, and then apply this directly to the site collection. So it's a kind of a blanket policy that applies to all of the sites within that site collection. So this is another really, big piece of what we see in SharePoint 2016, and it's going to be a huge advantage for those of you kind of looking to manage content and the retention of that content within SharePoint. Now, coming back to the DLP policies a little bit here, this is another really great feature set, and data loss prevention has been a big piece of other aspects of SharePoint or Microsoft technologies, but never really heavily emphasized in SharePoint. And now in 2016, we have the ability to come in and add very specific DLP policies that adhere to very specific, templates that define these kind of regulatory, governance requirements that we have to adhere to. So this could be, a PCI DSS for credit cards and debit card management. It could be, for data protections in the UK or the US. Unfortunately, we're not seeing a ton of Canadian-based templates here. Now, again, this is an early version of SharePoint, so it could just be that they have yet to really bring that technology forward with the updates. But really, it's a lot of emphasis on UK, US, personally identifiable information, PCI data security for credit cards and debit cards. And then, of course, we're looking at US financial data as well as US, social security and state breach laws. Now, we, unfortunately aren't seeing a ton of emphasis on Canadian-based regulatory requirements and governance requirements, but, over time, we're going to see some improvements and some additions to this. And then, of course, giving us the ability to create new policies that really are specific to, this data loss prevention. Now, what's great about it is that we can choose our DLP template, and let's just say for the sake of example here, I'm dealing with some credit card, and debit card management. I can then come in here and basically define the sensitive information type based on a kind of scale index of 1 to 9, and then also add incident reports to, anybody who encounters an issue with their, credit card association within SharePoint. So this is going to be, really useful for those of you selling content, selling product within SharePoint and having a more public and internet-facing architecture. But the data loss prevention capabilities in SharePoint 2016 are just a huge improvement to what we had in previous versions of SharePoint, and really very little emphasis on data loss prevention in 2013 and versions before that. So, I definitely will say that this is a huge improvement to what we saw in 2013 moving forward into SharePoint 2016. So what we now call the Compliance Center for SharePoint 2016. So great improvement there, guys. Definitely worth a look if you haven't seen it. And, just to kind of finish up here, guys, and I will say that, the site creation, there's no more of this working on it that we had in 2013, sitting there kind of waiting for the site to respond. I will say that Microsoft has done a substantial job in improving the speed at which sites are created. And you can just see, this is something that does need to be configured by the SharePoint farm administrators and can take basically between 1 to 2 seconds to fully create a new site and site collection, which is, comparison to the 40 to 60 seconds we saw in previous versions, a huge improvement. But with that said, this is a configuration that your admins are going to have to put in place. But even with that, you're going to see here that if I want to go in and I want to create a new team site, let's say for the sales guys, you're going to see a huge improvement to how fast content is created. I'm going to come in here and just for the sake of example, quickly create a new site, put it in our top link bar, and inherit that top link from our parent. I'm just creating a team site here for my my sales guys, and you can just see here the speed at which the sites are created. It's so much faster than what it was in 2013. So, again, I will say, that was maybe a good 5 seconds that it took to create versus, 40 to 60 seconds that we were seeing in previous versions. So huge improvement there in the speed. And, guys, I will say that there's definitely been some, great improvements to 2016 to what we saw in 2013. Not a huge change in the look and feel, but definitely something to look forward to. And, I think that as we start to look forward down the line to, what advantages SharePoint's going to offer, there's definitely some huge pieces coming forward with 2016. And I think it's definitely a product that we can look forward to, and really take advantage of in not only the, the ability to manage the content that we have within our environment, but also the speed at which our users can get up to, ramped up and using this technology, as opposed to, spending a lot of time learning and relearning something that, that we have to, utilize on a day-to-day basis. This is going to be something consistent, something quick, and really keep in line with what we've had in previous versions. So, I hope that gives everybody a good understanding of what to expect in 2016. Now, again, this is more from the end user and site administration kind of aspect. And as we start to move into farm administration, there's definitely a whole bunch of new stuff that's coming down the line with 2016. And maybe down the line we'll have a brief webinar on more administrative components associated to SharePoint 2016. And if we do, then I hope to see a lot of you back at that point if it's something that's important to the. So at this point, I think that's about it for the presentation. And just to quickly finish up, I know that there are some new offerings out there for our SharePoint courses. And I think at this point, I'm going to hand it back over to Carl, who can kind of quickly go through some of these new offerings from us here at CTC Train Canada. And there's definitely, some new courses coming down the line from Microsoft. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, we're now offering some savings on some of our new offerings for SharePoint 2016. So, if it's something that you guys are looking to get into and maybe get some training on, I'm sure Carl can delve into some details for you guys and give you a bit more information as to, where you guys can look to get some new training. So, I hope this was of benefit to everybody, and I hope you all have a wonderful weekend and enjoy the rest of your day. And at this point, I'll hand it over to Carl, and Carl can take it from here. Have yourselves a great day, and best of luck to everybody. Cheers.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Jared. Yeah, I think I speak for everybody. Really enjoyed that. And again, no questions came in through the chat function, but if there are, now's your chance to, if you had a question on Jared's presentation. Yep, so we do have quite a few new courses coming out. Our curriculum is split between courses for the IT support folks as well as end users. And we do have new courses coming out on SharePoint Server and SharePoint 2016. So you can certainly check our website for that. And as Jared had shared that slide, what we are offering, and this is exclusive to you folks, those who have joined us on this webinar, is 25% off any SharePoint course. That's an end user or an IT course. The only conditions are you need to book by the end of October, and it does need to be a guaranteed to run course. So please go ahead. If you have a look at our curriculum, if there's something of interest, reach out to us. I'll just post our contact information here. And we'd be happy to help you how you can leverage this discount for an upcoming SharePoint course. Last but not least, we have recorded this webinar, and it will be posted on our website by Tuesday at the latest. So if you'd like to review it or direct any of your coworkers to it as well, if they can benefit, please feel free to do so. Once again, thank you very much, folks, and keep posted. We will be wrapping up our schedule of webinars with a couple new ones coming out each month. Thank you again, and have a good rest of the day, and have a great weekend. Take care, everybody.